Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello, assalamu alaikum everyone. This is me, Ismaeel Qasim, and I welcome you all to a very special episode here at the Narr. Today we are joined by Paul Williams. He's the founder of Blogging Theology. Blogging Theology is a platform that is dedicated to fostering scholarly dialogue on comparative religion. About Paul Williams, he's a former evangelical Christian who embraced Islam, alhamdulillah. Paul has become a prominent figure in interfaith discussions. He brings together scholars from diverse religious backgrounds to explore theological questions. His work has earned him recognition in the Muslim 500, the world's most influential Muslims for 2024 and 2025. I must say it is an honor for Team Narr and myself to have him at Narr. Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your generous and kind words and invitation today. It's an honor to meet with you and to talk to your audience as well.
The honor is ours. Paul, I'll start off by asking, as the post the war in Gaza, or I must add, the genocide in Gaza, why is it that Muslims across the world are still being victim blamed? I mean, are we that far behind when it comes to narrative war that we cannot even just compete at the state level to present ourselves, or the Muslims presenting themselves as being the victims? I mean, 70,000 of our Muslim brothers and sisters were massacred over there, and still there's that hint of Islamophobia over there. What do you have to comment on it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm very much aware. I read the press in the UK and internationally every day, and we are seeing a steady increase in the rhetoric, the anti-Muslim rhetoric, anti-Islam rhetoric, in papers like the Daily Mail or the Telegraph or the Times and so on. And we see this in individuals like Tommy Robinson and other key figures on the far right. So certainly in the West, we are seeing a substantial increase. It's not massive overnight. It's happening day by day by day, week by week, month by month. It's increasing and increasing and increasing. And it's causing many people a great concern, not just Muslims. We must remember we have many friends and allies, also non-Muslims on the left, for example, or just decent people of goodwill. But it's becoming a problem. And Gaza, strangely, I thought it would result in an increased support for and sympathy towards Muslims and Palestinians in the West, anyway. But it's more complicated than that. There is some support, but there's also an increasing, as I say, Islamophobia and far right sentiment that we're seeing in the world around us. Even though most of the world agrees that Palestine should have a state, agrees that Palestine has very sadly has been genocided, the people who dominate the scene, the United Nations, or the economic and military power, unfortunately, are very, very anti-Muslim and anti-Palestine.
Absolutely. I mean, what can the Muslims do about it? Why didn't we see any unity amongst the Muslim countries? Why didn't they get united or together on the same platform to address this issue? What do you think is the root cause of this?
Well, I think we are seeing a great deal of unity amongst the ordinary people, men and women, young people who are Muslims and others, that we are very much in agreement that a terrible, terrible crime has happened, and the West has been shown to be completely hypocritical and having no real moral sense, certainly not supporting the international rule-based order, not really supporting liberal values of freedom and democracy. When it comes to Muslims or non-white people, there's an implicit racism when it comes to the Western press and Western attitudes towards Palestinians. So I think, but Muslims in general are very much of the same mind. Muslim governments, this is very controversial. Why haven't Muslim states done more? And, I'm not a politician, I'm not a political scientist, so I can't really address that. But I would imagine that a number of Muslim governments, without naming names, are basically so dependent on America or the West economically, militarily, to keep them in power, that they have very little room for maneuver. Perhaps there's one explanation, that if they were to publicly speak out or resist, their masters, in effect, that the regime will collapse. Now, that's one possible explanation.
Makes sense, and that is all the explanation that there is. I mean, even if you're not a politician or a political analyst, one can make 2 plus 2 to understand that this is there is an economic aspect linked or attached to it, as a result of which the Muslim countries are not being able to say more or do more. Having said all of this, you stated Islamophobia over here. I mean, Islamophobia, we saw a great deal of rise in it post 9/11. All right. And we saw that whole narrative shifted against the Muslims. I mean, again, my question is this: why weren't we able to counter it initially? And even till now, when everyone knows the realities and the tricks and trades of the Westerns, why aren't we able to do more about it?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't have easy answers, but I do think, though, in the long term, things will change because the global south, or whatever you want to call it, the BRICS nations are coming together. We are seeing, I think, the relative decline of the United States. It's overextended, it's overstretched militarily, it's economically bankrupt. It's been superseded now by countries like China in terms of GDP and productive capacity. I think we are seeing the tectonic plates, if you like, shift and change. And I think that the sheer numbers of Muslims in the world as well over 2 billion now. I think what we are seeing the seeds of the future here, that things will change. Unfortunately, they're not going to change overnight. But the status quo, the way it is now, I am certain will not remain. History never remains the same. History is always developing and changing and evolving. So I think we will see a change, and it will ultimately mean that the Muslim world will hopefully, inshallah, have more autonomy, more self-governance, and authentic Islamic governance as well.
So you are referring to multipolarity over here. That's understandable. I agree with you in that aspect. But what I cannot understand is how multipolarity is linked with a declining Islamophobia narrative in the world. Is there an opportunity for the Muslims when it comes to that?
Well, I don't know if there's an opportunity for the Muslims because of Islamophobia, but I think as we see the relative decline of the West and particularly the United States, I mean, Britain, for example, used to have an empire that went into rapid decline. So it's not so much Britain, but it's America. And we are seeing a multipolar world emerging, and this is very significant. Um, and this will mean that we can have, as I say, a greater say in governing our lives, and more influence in foreign policy and geopolitics. But I think I'm not sure how it's related to the far right and Islamophobia, though. I think that is to do with issues within Europe, for example, to do with immigration, concerns about immigration, uncontrolled borders, and also a rise of Christian nationalism as well. We're seeing that in America and in Britain, especially, where Christianity, which used to be quite supine and passive and secularized after the Second World War, in some parts of it is becoming very militant, and is reliving the old days of the Reconquista, of the antagonism towards Muslims. You have this revisiting of a very old narrative that I thought was just in the history books, but now it's coming back in. I didn't think we would live to see that, but we are. So we've not really learned from these mistakes, because we need to coexist as different religions, as Christians and Muslims. Conflict, antagonism, and misrepresenting Islam, which is now the very much in fashion with people like Tommy Robinson and others, will only lead to conflict and misunderstanding, and not to social cohesion and harmony at all.
So you mentioned two things over here: misrepresenting Islam and coexisting. I mean, when you say these things, I living over here in Pakistan next to Afghanistan, two things came into my mind as to how they have not allowed their women to gain basic education. And secondly, how are we misrepresenting Islam when our Muslims, the only Muslim nation across the world, is not presenting themselves as a, as a nation that can compete with the civilized world? I mean, so how can we end up eventually even just blaming the West for making up propaganda against us Muslims, when our own Muslim brothers are doing or playing in their own hands?
Well, yes, I mean, I probably think, I could be wrong, but vast majority of Muslims in the world would disagree with the idea that girls should not have an education. I don't think this is the broad consensus or the view of the ulama generally at all. It's very unusual. And there are hadith that talk about, an importance of girls and boys getting an education. So I'm not quite sure where these ideas come from. I mean, Afghanistan has been brutalized by years of occupation by Western powers. And before that, it was Russia who invaded, or the USSR that invaded Afghanistan, and so it's not had a time really to really develop and mature and stabilize and grow civic institutions in the way that a normal country would. It's similar to Iraq, unfortunately, a country that has extraordinary history. There's a harbor were there and so, been brutally destroyed by American and Allied forces and having to rebuild itself again. So they're in a very, very difficult situation, largely thanks to the West. So I think it's too early to judge about Afghanistan. I don't think most Muslims agree that children should be or girls should be denied education. It's not a normal view that Muslims hold, I don't think.
It is not just specific to the girls' education. I mean, I know for a fact that it's been 1500 days that women in Afghanistan have not been allowed to get proper basic education. But even other than that, the idea of the Islam that they hold, some of the ulama and the progressive mindset Muslims would like to consider it a bit extreme. I mean, is it the same Islam that is supposed to be, in application in today's day and age?
The problem I have when you ask that question is that I'm sitting here in London. Where do I turn for authentic news, true news about what's happening in Kabul or in the provinces or in Afghanistan? How can I get access to that information? If I read the Western broadsheets, I'm going to get a very negative, or the BBC, I'm going to get a very negative picture of Afghanistan. So I can't really myself, just speaking for myself, get an accurate understanding of what's really happening there. There are exceptions. There's the Five Pillars Muslim news agency based in the UK, and they have actually some of their journalists, or one of them at least, has been to Kabul in the last year or so and interviewed leading people and other people to find out what's really going on there. And so it's important that we have authentic information. I don't really have that, so I can't comment because I don't trust the Western media. I'm sorry to say, when it comes to Islam, to repeat it accurately, to report it accurately in an informed way. When recently several months ago, the German foreign minister met with the new president of Syria, and the foreign minister is a woman, and he wouldn't shake her hand. And this was filmed. It was in Deutsche Welle, the German news agency. And this caused a shock in Germany. How disgusting, how appalling that he wouldn't shake her hand. Now, she is Germany's leading diplomat, that her foreign she would know, she should know that Muslim men don't shake the hands of women they're not, immediately related to. This is basic stuff. But the way it was reported was very much an anti-Islamic way, portraying Muslims as backward, where it had nothing to do with that. That Jews have the same thing. Orthodox Jews have the same practice. So I think the West still willfully doesn't want to understand Islam, even on basic things like that. So how can we trust it to report what's really going on in Afghanistan?
But do you think is it appropriate that we eventually end up putting all blame on the West and not look inwards? I mean, as Muslims, we are nowhere near to what how where we should be or where we are supposed to be as Muslims. We are supposed to be leading the ummah and we are supposed to be leading the world, and we have done that in the history. I mean, there are precedents, there are longer periods of time where we have been rulers, but as it stands today, economically, politically, socially, we are nowhere and we are not even competing with them. So, yes, there is the Western narrative where they put everything on us, but at the same time, we need to look inwards as well.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you, actually. I'm not widely traveled, but I have been to several parts in the Muslim world. For example, Doha in Qatar. I've been there several times. And I often say to my friends back in the West, Doha is not a first world country. It's a first world plus country. So what I mean is, it's actually more advanced than many places in the West. I could go on all day about how amazing it is. All the public transport is free. It's beautiful. It's clean. There's no graffiti in the streets, no litter. There's hospitals all over the place. Leading cardiologists, oncologists, hospitals. Um, the shopping malls are amazing. And the political leadership there, although there are issues, of course, it's certainly not a democracy, and that's not necessarily means it's a bad thing. But the political leadership there have to cope with some very difficult, difficult geopolitical realities, of course, with Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran and America, and there's a huge US base there, which was bombed recently by Israel. But in terms of its civic structure, that what they've done is they've used the gas revenues, which they know is going to run out in X number of years. I can't remember how, 50 years or something, I don't know how long. But they've used it very wisely to invest in the infrastructure, in the economy, in the roads, in the education system, and everything else. And it's an extraordinary, blossoming, economically advanced and socially advanced country. And the thing is, Doha is not alone. There are other countries, there are places in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, for example, and others, which are very, these are not third world places. It's an absolute mistake to say that. Now, there are very backward places that I've also visited. I won't name the countries, not a million miles from there either. So there's a great range of very advanced and very backward, depending on which country you're at, depending on if they have natural resources. Some countries like Jordan don't have any real natural resources, for example, so they can't benefit from oil or gas or whatever. Other countries in North Africa, again, I won't mention names, have particular political difficulties because of the rulers there. But I think it's wrong, just wrong to say that the Muslim world is backward. It's certainly
It's
not.
Islam,
I'm not even talking about Indonesia or Malaysia yet. I mean, I haven't even spoken about the Far East.
Islam is supposed to be more than just the infrastructure, is my point that I can quote over here. No?
Well, if you look at the ethos, for example, going back to Qatar again, it's an Islamic society. If you look at the ethos, people there they have good adab, they're honest. I mean, I'm not saying everyone's a saint, but you get a level of social. For example, during the World Cup a couple of years ago, people in the West there, women went over there they said, "Wow, we felt safe on the streets in this Muslim country. We didn't feel that we were going to be attacked or touched up by drunken footballers because there was no alcohol that was banned. There's a
But
certain kind of civility there."
I'm sorry, Paul, I'm cutting you over here, but the sort of introduction that was awarded to Trump uh, by them was not much Islamic, is my point of view that I'm trying to state. I mean, as Islamic, we had our Muslim sisters, I mean, roaming bareheaded, shifting and waving their heads around. I mean, the sort of welcome that was given to Trump was not much Islamic. Just one example that just came to my mind, off
Sorry,
the top of my
the
mind.
welcome given by who? Sorry, I missed what you said there.
The thing that came to my mind when you mentioned Qatar was two things came to my mind. I mean, where were these Muslim countries when the genocide of 70,000 odd people was happening in Gaza? One. Secondly,
No, I agree. No, this is a good. No, just on that point. No, this is a fair point you're making, and I don't have as I say, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an expert on the international order, but I am aware that countries like Qatar did play a role in terms of being a place where Israel and Hamas and other interested parties could meet through intermediaries to try and broker a peace deal, for example. They did have a diplomatic role, which they've been working at for years now. It's a tiny little country, but why bigger countries, didn't do anything? I mean, Turkey, for example, President Erdogan has said lots and lots of very good things, I think, about Palestine. But where has been the follow-up action? Where has been the actual material or military substance? And this is a good point. And I think your question is a valid one. And I can only speculate as a layman who is not an expert as to some of the reasons why this may be the case.
The other thing that came to my mind when I mentioned that infrastructure is not all Islam was the fact that you mentioned Qatar over here, right?
Yeah.
When Donald Trump visited Qatar, the sort of welcome that was awarded to him, the royal welcome, in which there was hair flipping of women who were bareheaded, who were Muslims, and he was just walking around, that did not represent Islam, that hurt the sentiments of Muslims.
I didn't see that, and I'm not. I mean, I can't comment on incidents. I've not seen that or researched it or anything. I would have to look at that.
Makes sense.
When I refer to Qatar, I'm not saying it's a perfect society. They're not saying it's a perfect society. No one's saying that. All I'm saying is when I've been there, you see, why I mentioned that place and several other places which could be mentioned is in the West, it's often thought that the Muslim world is backward, is underdeveloped, it's not economically developed at all, it's socially regressive and so on. This is not true. It can be, it is true in some places, perhaps by Western standards at least, but there are clear examples where the West could look and admire actually what's happening. The Islamic ethos and the population have produced a society which is not based on liberal principles, but is economically and socially advanced. And boy, is it civilized, very civilized places. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it's perfect or there aren't problems, but it's more complicated than that. And that complexity and nuance is often missing from Western responses or understandings of the Muslim world.
I like your optimism, but again, sitting over here in Pakistan, I mean,
Sunnah is a bit optimistic as Sunnah. Yeah.
understandable, but sitting over here in Pakistan, we are not following Sunnah. I mean, sitting over here in Pakistan, the situation is a bit bleak and murky. Situation over here is that youth wants to leave this country that was won and fought over on the basis, on the names or the pretext of being a Muslim country. And now our Muslim brothers and sisters want to leave this very place and want to settle to another land that is not at all Islamic.
Which is where do they want to go, do you think?
I mean, to any Western country, to any European country, they'd be okay going over there and settling there.
Well, there are a lot of Pakistanis here in the UK. Yeah, I mean, I can't call it. I've never had the pleasure and the honor of visiting your country. A friend of mine, however, Abdullah Andalusi, it has been there several times, and he spent several months there. I think earlier this year, I had a pleasure of talking to him about his experience in Pakistan, up and down the country, talking to Muslim youth, and his impression. I mean, I'm not saying he's right and you're wrong, or you're wrong and or you're right and he's wrong, but he had a much more optimistic assessment, meeting a lot of Muslim youth at universities and so on, in terms of their commitment to Islam, their intellectual development, their insights into geopolitics. He had lots of positive things to say about Muslim youth, and he didn't say to me that Muslim youth want to leave Pakistan. But again, I can't. I've never been to your country, so I'm completely ignorant. So I couldn't possibly comment.
Paul, interesting aspect is that Abdullah Al Andalusi, he happens uh, to be a friend of mine as well. He has been on my shows two times on two different platforms, and we have had this discussion thoroughly. Again, his journey over here, and I understand that he is very optimistic when it comes to Pakistan on a whole, and that there is improvement being made. But at the same time, in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, the figure keeps rising when it comes to the amount of people who want to leave this country. My point is that the argument that I'm establishing.
I'm saying I will say that that is normal to some extent. I'm not saying, you see, a lot of people in this country, the UK, want to leave. A lot of people in France want to leave France, and ditto in Germany. There's always, particularly young people, who are dissatisfied with the economic situation. So this is very natural and possibly a good thing that they want to kind of advance by going elsewhere and, get their fortune and improve their life. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, there may be particular exacerbating factors in Pakistan which just make even more people want to leave. But the fact that some people want to leave Pakistan is not necessarily a bad thing. I say there are other countries who have similar phenomena as well.
Totally agree. Agreed. I agree with you in that aspect. But overall, the point that I'm trying to establish is the thought that comes to mind is that Pakistan is the only Muslim nuclear superpower. So the point is that if we are making a point or a case of a Muslim ummah and the unity of the Muslim countries at a larger level. I mean, for instance, you can take the example of OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I mean, 57 Muslim countries are a part of it, and yet no constructive step has been taken on a unifying level when it comes to Muslims. I mean, as Muslims, we are supposed to be leading the rest of the world. That is our thought. That is how we have been brought up. That is what our history.
I'm optimistic because at the moment things are not are very pessimistic in some ways because we don't Pakistan may be a nuclear power, but it can't in any way influence American foreign policy. Unfortunately, it has no leverage any more than Britain really does with America. But as I've said before, I do not believe the status quo, the situation we're in, is permanent. is changing and will change. I think we will continue to see the relative decline of the United States as a military and economic power. You can see what's going on with China taking over. You're seeing the resurgence of BRICS. BRICS are these other countries coming together, thinking of actually coming off the dollar, which is amazing. You're seeing some really interesting economic changes here. And also, I would add to that, perhaps more Islamically, that there are hadith that do speak ultimately of the return of good Islamic governance in terms of the caliphate, I think. And this is something that Abdullah is very passionate about as well, I think. At the moment, this has been prophesied in a Bukhari hadith, we're in that interregnum period where there is no Islamic governance. I mean, globally, for the Muslims as a whole, as an ummah, with a caliphate, with justice for Muslims, and so we are weak, but it will not always be so. And I'm a firm believer in the future, in God's good timing, inshallah, we will have this again on the model of the early Sahaba, of the first four or five caliphs that we have. And this has been predicted in Islam. So I think we have good reasons to be hopeful. Whether or not you and I will live to see it is another matter.
Completely understandable. I mean, we can be hopeful and optimistic based on faith, but when it comes to governance and geopolitics and the realities of the current world, I mean, I don't understand as to how a caliphate can be formed under the paradigm of the current nation state paradigm.
I agree. I completely agree with you. No, you're absolutely right. What we've got now are European nation state-like systems imposed usually by France or Britain after the post-colonial period. In the past, Muslims could travel freely from Damascus, say, to Cairo. They didn't need visas, didn't need passports. They could go from place to place for education or for trade. It was very much, there was a freedom of movement, free trade amongst the Muslim world. Absolutely not the case now. So we've gone backwards. We've gone backwards from a period when there was more freedom for Muslims to trade and go to new cultures and new places. So yeah, that this is a regressive step we've had, but again, I think it can be overcome. There's nothing natural about the European nation state. It's not inevitable. It's not always going to be with us. There are different Islamic models of governance that we can look to and adopt, and I think we will do one day, inshallah.
Paul, what does the future look like to you? Before conclusion, I would want to understand or quickly shed light on your journey as well. But before that, if you can share with our audiences as to what you think the future is going to hold for the Muslims across the world.
Well, I'm not a prophet. I have no crystal ball, but we have just reason to be optimistic. God is in control of the world. He has sent his prophets to guide us. We are not alone. We can turn to him for guidance, for help, and he has through the Prophet Muhammad upon him be peace predicted the coming again of true, just Islamic governance. This is predicted and prophesied in this era. So I think we can, in the longer term, be optimistic. We must always be optimistic and not give in to despair and sadness permanently. It's this difficult world we live in, but God is in control, and we are, after all, Muslims, and we have this great gift of faith, which other people don't have, and we must invite other people to it, actually. And we must look to the Akira as well. So I think we have many reasons to be hopeful, not in a superficial way, but in a deep way about our lives and our future. We're not on our own. We have our God with us. He's near us, and we can turn to him. And he has promised to bring justice back again one day, inshallah.
Inshallah, 100%. Before conclusion, one last question about your journey, about how you embraced Islam. And when you did, or once you embraced Islam, were you aware that there is going to be a confusion or an inherent conflict amongst the Muslims as to whether they need to be progressive or conservative?
Um, Look, the vast majority of Muslims in the world are mainstream Sunni Muslims. Yeah. They follow one of the four schools, probably. They're not, radical LGBT supporting secularists. These people exist in the West, but these kind of modernists are a tiny minority of the global ummah. We mustn't exaggerate this. Their voices are amplified by the media. In Europe, for example, an ex-Muslim will get a platform, or a lesbian so-called. You'll get these kind of voices being amplified by the media. But in terms of the mainstream normal Muslims globally, they're on the deen. We have our struggles. It's different in Christianity. Christianity globally has been compromised. If you look at the Church of England, the Anglican Communion, even the Catholic Church, although it's kind of officially conservative, but there are many, many bishops and priests and even cardinals who dissent from the teaching of it. It's much more conflicted and divided than the Ummah is over faith and morals, for example. So the thing is, when I meet Muslims, I often say this to people, when I meet Muslims around the place, I know exactly what they're going to think on a whole range of issues. I really do, whether it be any of the aforementioned things I've said. But if I meet a Christian, I have no idea what they believe about gay marriage, or about abortion, or about interest, or about capital punishment, or even about Jesus and the Trinity, or whether or not the Bible is the literal word of God or just a human text. I mean, the list is very long, and I have no idea until I actually say, well, what do you think? And this applies to priests as well. I don't know what they're going to think. But Muslims, in the main, I know what they're going to think. They are 90% of the world's Muslims are Sunni Muslims. They basically follow the same Aqidah. I don't mean in I mean in terms of there's one God, and Prophet Muhammad upon him is the last prophet of God. We don't think he's divine. We don't worship him. We all have basically the same beliefs, and that's quite different from Christians, in my experience.
So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being a part of Narr.
No, it's been a pleasure, and there's some tough questions there, and I don't have all the answers, unfortunately. But thank you for it's good to talk about them.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, to all the audiences that were watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Dearly hoping that you enjoyed the conversation. The idea is to learn, hence the reason that I end up asking a lot of questions, because the goal is कि अगर सवाल नहीं पूछेंगे तो सीखेंगे कैसे. So do let us know in the comment section as to what you think about the whole conversation. We'll dearly hope and try and request Abdullah Al-Andalusi to join us at Narr once again as well. We'll definitely be hosting Paul Williams as well in future too. This is me, Ismaeel Qasim, signing out. Until next time. Allah Hafiz.